Welcome to the Seeking Wisdom podcast with Joni Marmo. Real stories, life lessons with faith at the center. Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us today so that we can talk about something that most of us struggle with, Lord, which is fear, which is being afraid. But we know that that doesn't come from you, Lord. And so we ask you to help us in overcoming it when it faces us, in using it wisely when we need it to survive, but to just put it in its proper place always. We ask you to protect all of us from any evil and harm, and to continue to bless everyone who is listening to this podcast and everyone who is involved in this podcast. And we ask for the intercession of St. Michael the Archangel. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. A gentleman by the name of Bob Proctor once said, "Both fear and faith require you to believe in something you cannot see. You choose." I never thought of it that way, but it's true. Both fear and faith require the belief in the unseen. If you're a person of faith, you believe in something greater than you, a divine providence that will lead you to have a more positive outlook of life circumstances. When you choose fear, you tend to focus on the negative scenarios that may or may not come to pass. All of this got me thinking even further. What if you're a person of deep faith and yet you struggle with fear? A good priest by the name of Father Humphrey, by the way, shout out Father Humphrey, who is a chaplain at Barry University, he told me, fear is normal because it's part of our human condition. Jesus had his agony in the garden. But, he said, if we truly are people of faith, at some point we have to surrender to God's will, just as Jesus did. Okay, so when you look at it through the lens of faith, we do get to choose. But why is it so hard? In today's episode of the Seeking Wisdom podcast, we are going to choose to not be afraid of fear. I'm your host, Joni Marmo, and today our guest is a licensed marriage and family therapist who is going to help us understand fear, where it comes from, and ways to overcome it. Welcome, Catalina Fortich.
Hi, Joni. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
I'm so glad you invited me.
Yes,
I'm happy to be here.
Well, you know, this episode was inspired by a friend who said, Joni, because I did an episode on the fear of reinventing myself. And she suggested, why don't you do an episode on fear? To which I thought, great idea. And then I said, I can't talk about fear by myself. I have no idea what I'm talking about. So I thought of you, who better than you, to, number one, you're amazing. You're an expert on, in your field, and you can explain this to us so that we can better understand it. And you're just charming and wonderful. And so you're a perfect guest.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And hopefully we can debunk some myths about fear and understand it a little bit more, and people can walk away with, something in their back pocket that they can take with them, because this is something not just you, but I'm sure everybody is going to have to face at some point in their life.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love that, because when I reached out to you, you said it's widely misunderstood. Mm-hmm. So I love that, because I said, let's unpack, why is it widely misunderstood? What is it that we don't understand about fear? So let's start with that. What is fear?
Well, it's not that we don't understand fear. It's that we don't understand emotions, period. We don't have a real understanding of the function of emotions. Therefore, a lot of us are struggling. We're struggling because we haven't been given a roadmap. And if we have been given a roadmap, it's usually, very much saturated with a lot of misinformation. And for example, when you mentioned that we choose fear, we don't choose our emotions.
Right.
Right. So it's more about, instead of, trying to kind of like guilt ourselves or question ourselves why we're feeling this, when and how did I choose this?
Yeah.
It's more about understanding why it's here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And fear at its very core, just at a biological sense, is a protective emotion.
Okay.
So we have emotions that, or all emotions, right, move us towards or away or have some sort of function to help us as human beings to survive in a world that's full of threat, in a world that has unpredictability and uncertainties. We're wired for survival. And so our emotions help us, kind of like it's this way to communicate and filter our internal world and our external world. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And so if we didn't have fear, we wouldn't have any real way to kind of evaluate and assess if there's threat in the world that we need to protect ourselves from.
So there is use for fear,
Yeah,
obviously.
This week I remember I told a client of mine, okay, so think from the top of your head to the bottom of your toe. Is there any aspect of your body that isn't there with a purpose?
Okay.
Right?
Am I supposed to answer you right now?
Well, think about it.
Like,
what is your hair? What are your
Yeah.
eyebrows for? What are your lashes for? Right. And if we ask a doctor, there's like a biological reason.
Right.
What is your nose for? What are your nostrils? What are your nostril hairs for? There's not a single thing on our body that isn't there with purpose
Yeah.
and function. Our emotions are the same.
Okay.
Like they are there with a purpose and with an intent. We just have very limited knowledge and understanding of our emotions. And so, it's interesting because this week I was watching it was a committee, I don't know, some sort of committee that kind of like approves budgeting back in you're going to help me out here, but when was Mr. Rogers was around. He was like, what, 60s, 70s, something like that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And he was talking about emotions with a lot of fluidity, like explaining, like, I have a song that I teach kids. And he read it, and the guy answered him, oh, I think you just won the $20 million. Basically, we've known this, and Western culture knows this. But somewhere along the lines, it got mixed up with the medical model, and we started more so pathologizing our emotions than trying to understand them.
Okay.
And that was breaking.
What do you mean by that, like in layman's terms?
In layman's terms, pathology means it's malignant, right? Like this is something wrong. Like we have to take this out.
All emotions, generally speaking.
All the uncomfortable ones, right?
Okay.
Oh, we want joy. We want
to be happy all the time.
We want to be happy all the time, right? But anything that was distressing to us, we kind of like imprinted that or associated that with something that's malignant or a pathology. Like, oh, sadness is bad, right?
Right.
Or fear is bad, or anxiety is bad. And so we kind of like lumped all these uncomfortable emotions and kind of said, like, this is something we don't want to feel. Right. So how do we get rid of them versus understanding them, versus coexisting with them, versus seeing the function in them? And that's when we started kind of really straying.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that, because you're right. I think our culture, our society, it's all about comfort. It's all about happiness. Everything is, and then it's led to this very self-centered society about the, self and me and da 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 da, which there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, but when it's extreme, it's bad, right? Yeah. So I guess my question, when you mention emotions, and we've talked about this, the movie Inside Out, which I love, because it actually, they did a great job of like explaining all the different emotions in this little girl. But so it's an emotion, but then shouldn't there be some sort of control? Because if you're too overly emotional, that's not a good thing either, right? So what's the balance?
Yeah, I love that you said control, because that's actually where we get ourselves the most stuck. When we try to control an emotion, when we try to resist an emotion, when we try to avoid an emotion, that's when we get ourselves into trouble. That's what kind of, there's like this, saying that we have in psychology that's what you resist persists.
Okay.
Right? So we want to move away from trying to control it or resist it or avoid it, because that's actually then what is causing the pathology. That is what's called, and the pathology meaning the symptoms, meaning the behaviors
Okay.
that we're doing in order to get rid of the emotion is actually what we're now like gets a label, right? Then that label is a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Right? Like now the diagnosis is general anxiety. Now the diagnosis is obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, so we're putting labels to the symptoms, but really at the core of that is a person who's trying to avoid, resist an emotion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what we want to get is not for somebody to control their emotions, but to be able to regulate themselves, to recognize there's an emotion happening. And to, again, the function of it is now that emotion, let's say if it's fear and it's valid, right? Like there's something in front of me that I need to fight, flight, or freeze from.
Which I was going to ask you about, right? Uh-huh.
I need to run away from this. I need to kind of get small and freeze because this is threatening to me, right? The thing is that now, as we say, there's no lions, tigers, and bears that we need to, we have these beautiful homes with walls that are keeping us safe.
Right.
But now we have imprinted fear in many other things.
Yeah.
So now our body still has the same nervous system, the same mechanism of fight, flight, or freeze, but now we associate our threats to, going to a social event, right? Like now we fear that. Or life changes, right? Going back to what you said, like my fear of changing, right?
Yeah.
We're wired to fear change.
Yeah.
Right? So again, nothing wrong with it because we're wired with that. Why would we be wired with fear? Well, because if something changes in our environment, then that cues us to like, is this a threat or not? And we're better off perceiving it as a threat first and assessing later, ask questions later.
Yeah.
Because in the hierarchy of things, I'd rather be safe and alive
Yes.
than trusting and dead.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
or hurt or severely injured or whatever.
Exactly. So change, depending on how much we've experimented with, like, right, I think of people who have, military brats, right? They always say like, I moved 1,000,000 times. So moving, they kind of desensitized from that. They no longer perceived it as a threat because there was a lot of exposure with that over time that it kind of like took away the fear element of it. But if you've never moved, or you've never made a shift in your life, you've never made a big transition, then you're immediately going to perceive that as a very threatening thing.
Yeah.
Before you settle into, oh, okay, this is okay. I can deal with this, right?
Yeah.
So you want to have as much exposure as you can throughout your life of different things. And by exposure, I mean like just lived experiences, right? That are challenging but not threatening.
Yeah.
Right? Or challenging but not traumatic. Right? So some people learn to adapt through trauma, but that adaptation doesn't necessarily mean that it's a healthy adaptation. But we can learn to adapt to things if we're challenged, right? Like maybe I struggled a little bit as a little kid, like learning how to do my shoes, or, we want our kids to be confronted with challenges so that they get better over time. And then changes, and teach them like, changes is hard. Yeah. Right. I'm thinking also I'm going to make a lot of references to Instagram, which I'm outing myself that I spend way too much time on social media. But my algorithm's all psychology, so it's all very helpful.
And we'll put all her handles in the description of the show, so you can follow her.
Yeah, which is Kat Gets
because
Curious.
she posts a bunch of great things. Yeah. So
not often, but I do share
yes.
a lot of what I see. And one of those things that I saw, I don't know if I shared it, but I definitely saved it, was the reaction of little kids when they would see their fathers right after they shaved their beard. I don't know if you've seen that.
No.
So it's like, what do you call that when there's videos of a compilation or, right? Like various films together.
Yeah.
And so the little kid's like, waiting, happy and content. And then the father comes around the corner and the father had a beard for all their existence, right? Like this, we're talking about a 4-month-old or an 8-month-old or a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
And the minute they see their father without a beard, they go, just terror. And you see them go down and almost like a self-protection, move away, right? They do all these things to try to protect themselves. They're terrified that their father took off their beard. This change in them is not familiar to them. And they perceive that as, in my world, something's changed and I'm scared.
Right. And who is this person?
And who is this person?
Yeah.
Right. And it'll take them some time, maybe by the end of the day, or maybe a couple of days.
Yeah.
I remember happened to me with my uncle.
Right.
Like he shaved his mustache. And I was like, ew, I don't like it.
Right.
So I wasn't a little baby. I didn't necessarily,
you didn't freak out
and start crying. But I was like, I don't like this.
Yeah.
I remember happened to me when the presidents changed when I was in kindergarten. Like I remember right. So we're wired to be very suspicious of, fearful of change, because stability is safety.
And is it also fear of the unknown?
Yeah, that's exactly. Stability is safety, what's known.
Right.
Instability, I don't know. I don't know who this person is without a beard. Did all his magical powers as my father go away with that? Like we don't like change, right? So we have to do both and acknowledge that fear and change are inevitable.
Yeah.
And how do I become more resilient to it? How do I learn to go through that? And we have lots of ways to do that. As little kids, we first have to learn that in moments of fear, somebody can help us walk through that.
Yeah.
Right? We have to learn resiliency through somebody modeling it to us. We have to learn that even in the midst of change, maybe let's say the example of the little kid, the father will slowly approach him. And then, little by little, he starts feeling a little bit more comfortable. And so learning to adjust to those changes, but to expect us to, switch off fear like we would a light, is not very realistic. And we have to manage those realities and those fantasies, because there's nothing inherently wrong with fear. Right.
Mm-hmm. It's just, but also I would think there's so many things that you mentioned that I'm like unpacking. The beard thing reminded me of my brother. My older brother's always had a mustache, and I remember he shaved it off when his daughters were young and they were freaking out. Everybody freaked out because all of a sudden he has no mustache, right? Yeah. And for me, I was like, oh yeah, you look weird, but yeah, okay. And then he grew it back, by the way. So it was a very short-lived thing. But the other thing that you mentioned about change, because like it got me thinking, actually someone that I interviewed mentioned that in another podcast, that when she was young, she was about 8 years old, and she actually got emotional. Her family moved from Houston to Miami. Mm-hmm. And as she was talking about it, she actually was surprised in herself that she got emotional in that moment, telling her story. Mm-hmm. But yet, as she got older, like she wasn't afraid of, she changed jobs a few times. She moved to New York. She was okay. Mm-hmm. So does that mean that, going back to what you said about resiliency, does that mean that in her case, like she was able to process that, even though it was painful for her, she was able to see, oh, this change is not a bad thing. So then maybe she processed it okay. And that's why she wasn't afraid of it in the future.
Yeah. She was able to associate that change with, and eventually, very positive things. So now she knows, right? They coexist, this change idea of new things and uncertainty, and that positive things can come from that. But if we're talking about trauma, which is a big specialty of mine that I work with, trauma, attachment trauma, many different complex kinds of trauma. If you learn that change meant something very traumatic, and that it actually, you were not safe in that change, then you will fear change, right?
Yeah.
It's not we don't necessarily associate that with something very positive. And so our nervous system will go into fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
For some people, flight looks like very chaotic, or, a lot of movement, a lot of energy, more of like what we look at somebody and like they're very they're anxious, right? Like we can viscerally see it. Some people might shut down, become more avoidant, right? Some people can get angry and irritable, right? And those are just the manifestations of that fight or flight, right? And then they become persistent because, we don't even see it that it's associated to this, right? Like we don't even
that it's associated to a trauma or something that happened before.
Or to the change or to what, why am I, part of becoming more well-versed in our emotions is being able to go inward and being to identify, okay, so I notice there's a part of me that feels fearful.
Yeah.
And observing that part and saying, okay, what is it that's causing this? And the cue is that you might notice one of those fight, flight, freeze, kind of like you notice your body stiffening up, or you notice that there's a lot of heat in your body. Like you're just noticing those sensations. And then, okay, there's a part of me that you now can associate with fear, right? Like, why am I feeling fear about this? Right? And then getting curious. The why shouldn't translate to judgment. The why should translate to curiosity.
Okay.
And so now I'm curious, why is this fear here? And what happens is because we filter things so quickly in our society, the way that we have been taught is that these emotions are bad. We don't necessarily approach it with curiosity. We I shouldn't be feeling this way. And already that should there, you're implying that it's bad. If there's judgment, you're already resisting it.
Yeah.
If you want to get rid of it, what can I do to get rid of this as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
So you don't even give yourself time to go in and be like, I'm noticing that I'm very fearful right now. Right. And what is that? And then you can make those connections and be like, oh, that's right. This big change is coming in my life. Like, how do I show myself grace through this or invalidate that I'm feeling this? And then how do I comfort myself, right? But you can't, there's another saying that we tend to say. So I'm like, just, giving you all those quick therapy with things that we say because we have
we're in an amazing therapy session here. I love it.
Giving you all the things. You can't regulate an emotion you're not allowing yourself to have.
Okay.
Right. So how do you calm fear when you're not allowed to have it?
Right, because you're telling yourself you shouldn't have it.
Yeah.
So then how can you even like reconcile it and say, like you were saying, and I love that, like be curious about it. Why am I feeling this? What is it that, what is it exactly that I'm afraid of?
Yeah.
And it made me think about, and it's funny going back to the priest that I mentioned earlier, the reason he told me this is because I went to see him because I was freaking out because I was having a lot of anxiety, which I want to touch on that in a minute about the difference between fear and anxiety, if there is one. But the reason I go to the priest was because I was having this extraordinary amount of fear, which is not something that I normally have. And it was related to a thyroid cancer diagnosis that all of a sudden came. But even before then, I was having unexplained fear. And I started to realize that, okay, what is it about this? Like all the doctors were telling me, listen, of all the diagnoses that you can get, this one's it's not a bad thing. They're all like being very positive about it. Oh, this is just a blip on the radar. Don't worry about it. Da, 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 da. And so you're kind of sitting there going, yeah, but like they're going to slit my throat here. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of freaking out about this.
It's my throat. Nobody else's throat's getting slit here.
It's like, I'm kind of freaking out about this. Yeah. And then I started to realize, and I actually think I wrote this in a blog I talked about this on a podcast as well about finding your voice. And I realized that the fear that I was having was the vocal cords and losing my voice. And just the fact that it was in this area, right? It's also, and a nurse validated it for me too, which I was so grateful because he said, it's normal that you're nervous. This is your air path or airway, whatever it's called. I'm terrible with medical terms. So it's normal for you to be nervous. And, and so then once like the nurse helped, but then when Father Humphrey told me that, like my faith then kind of helped me. So by the time I went into, and you helped me too, because I was seeing you, like by the time I was in pre-op, I was just so chill. Like there was just this peace that just came over me because I reconciled what it was that I was and why was I afraid? So by the time I went in, I was like, hey, that's all right. Oh, that's fine. I was talking to everybody, of course, chitty chatting. I got to know everybody, whatever.
Yeah.
But, it really did help me to kind of, okay, what is going on here? And I think a lot of times we don't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, they all gave you permission and normalized it, right? And
Yes.
and validated it, which already it's okay. So I'm not crazy, right? So let's take that off the table.
Yes.
And then
I do a lot of sanity checks.
already that's going to bring the level of distress down,
Yes.
right? And then another thing it sounds that happened was like it allowed you to make meaning to what you were feeling, and we're meaning making creatures, species, like a species that we want to understand things.
Right.
And so, in any day, any given moment, we're constantly feeling things. And we've never been given a true kind of permission or even an understanding of what our emotions are. So when anything shifts in us, we can either freak out because we don't know why and what's going on and how do I get rid of it, which is what state we're mostly living in.
Yes.
That's the state that's the baseline of humanity right now.
Yeah.
Versus, those when we have that saying like the Zen people.
Right.
They're not Zen because they're not feeling things.
Yeah.
They're Zen because they know how to sit with what they're feeling. They're not at war with what they're feeling.
Yeah.
They're not at conflict internally. They can make sense of it in a way that they can be at peace with it. Right. And
do you think we're lacking that now generally in society? I think so.
1,000%.
Everybody's frantic.
The fact that we were not given any emotional literacy is why I have a lucrative career. That and aside from other things.
Yeah.
But what I'm really saying is mothers or husbands or just people in general in our lives that haven't learned how to regulate themselves, haven't been able to find their inner peace, are creating a lot of tension and distress in the people around them, hence their children, hence their wives, their husbands. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to generalize.
Yeah.
If the people in our lives that haven't learned how to do that are then going through the world operating that way, and then it's just like this domino effect that now if we don't have a regulated parent in the room, and then the child learns that and picks up on that, then that they're going to live with a very dysregulated nervous system that's constantly seeing threat. And then that gets imprinted, right? Like my parent is, they're constantly at a state of anger or distress or whatever it may be, or they're anxious. And then I now either learn how to regulate your emotion, right? As a child, like I'm regulating you, or I have to keep myself small or quiet or whatever it may be to not dysregulate you more, which means there is no room for them to learn how to understand themselves. So it just becomes this one generation after another generation. If you don't break that cycle, and by that I mean somebody's got to learn how to do this.
Right. Yeah. Or get the tools or the help that they need to be able to understand what's going on. Yeah. We've talked about anxiety, and I'm really curious, what is the difference between fear and anxiety? Mm-hmm. And are we generally more anxious today than we were maybe 10 years ago?
I think 10 years ago?
Well, I don't know. 5.
How many decades do we want to go back? I think we have a language for it now more so.
Okay.
Right? We when did you ever hear anybody say, I'm anxious today, or I feel anxious, or, we would use other words or other behaviors. Yeah. But just like fear is an emotion, so is anxiety. Yeah. And they are very related. The way that we would describe it is, fear is that momentary emotion that's related to like an instant of threat, right? Where our nervous system gets activated. Okay. And anxiety is like that threat response just never turned off.
I see.
We're
so
perpetually,
it's constant.
Yeah.
But that's very unhealthy, obviously. Yeah. And then, so how do you deal with that if you're not, Because like if there's a moment, like in my case, what I mentioned, the surgery, the fear, I was able to reconcile it. Okay, put it aside. It's not, but then when you have anxiety and if it's constantly perpetuating, like what do you do? How do you cope with
approach
it?
that? Yeah. And anxiety has a lot of different manifestations, right? So, anxiety that we feel about a certain situation, and we can kind of pinpoint it, and then we're able to like regulate ourselves pretty quickly. Those are not something that would get like a label of, a diagnosis, right? Like we're like, oh, I'm anxious because I have a test, or something like that.
Right.
If I'm perpetually anxious, right? If I'm constantly in that state, is because I'm kind of set already. My nervous system's kind of set to that fight or flight response.
Okay.
And, one of the explanations I can give is, when and at what point in your life was it made sense for you to have that emotion be very available, and at the forefront to protect you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I think so. Yeah.
Right. So if, again, you learned, like you were saying, we live in a society that's very exigente, or, I forgot the word in English, right?
Where we expect the expectation is just, we want
everybody,
things a certain
high
way.
achiever, perfectionism, that is inherently an environment where we're going to feel anxious in.
Yes.
Right? Where there's a lot of criticism, where there's a lot of that, then we have to be ready to perform, or we have to be ready, right? So
in our everyday lives, because you're so, oh my gosh, I'm just having an aha moment. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but no, because you mentioned social media. So imagine, especially for the younger generations, and let's be honest, even for ourselves, like, you're going to you may post something, and depending on what you post, you may get, people giving you negative responses or whatever, which then may make you feel
response. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Rejection,
Yeah,
and abandonment are our biggest threat response, like triggers.
Yeah.
Abandonment and rejection for sure. Right. And so criticism is filtered as rejection.
Yes.
Right. And so when we are so exigente, or there we go again. This is how we know. If I have a hard time if my clients are not bilingual. I need to be able to go in and out of my languages. No. But if we have these high expectations of ourselves, right? And then we have a parent that's constantly doing that. Now we've internalized that. And so I'm constantly in that state.
Yeah.
Then I go to work, and then I have this boss that's constantly yelling at me. Like, how do you not live perpetually anxious? And I had a client this week say to me, I'm just an anxious person. I said, nobody's born that way. Nobody's born that way. Like
it's just circumstantial, or the circumstances.
Somewhere along the line, it made sense for your nervous system to be set at that state, right? To that be the baseline. I do a form of therapy called IFS, which is parts work. And the way we would conceptualize that is, there's a part that's anxious. Yeah. And it's constantly, showing up in all these ways and in all these situations. And then I help facilitate that understanding and that communication between you, because you are not that part of you, but that part of you needs a lot of help. It needs a lot of help because somewhere along the lines, it was safer to stay alert than it was to not. So they literally, it's a person that doesn't know how to be at ease. Yeah. Does that, even feeling like at ease feels threatening. Right. Because at any moment the shoe can drop, or somebody might come and criticize me, or something might be wrong. And so there's many manifestations of that anxiety, and, things that we call like mom guilt, or, just in our day-to-day life, or people pleasing, or, high achieving people like workaholics, or, all these terms, they're just anxious. Right. It's just anxiety.
Yeah. It just has different names. I was just going to say perfectionism. Yeah. I'm very hard on myself. Yeah. So then I've always set the bar very high. I know where that comes from. That came from my mom, because my mom also set the bar very high for herself, and that came from her mom. It's just like you were saying earlier, it's generational. So everything that I do, I like to do it to the best way possible.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of learning to let go of that perfectionism, and it is what it is, and and be a little bit comfortable with that, because at the end of the day, none of us are perfect, and nothing is ever going to be perfect, right? But the you said something so interesting about like that state of anxiety, and how can you, what came to mind was, I'm sorry I'm not articulating this, but for example, I'm not afraid of public speaking. If I were, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. But when I was, especially the last few years of my job, I had to do a lot of presentations. And I know that a lot of people like are petrified of having to do like a public presentation to their bosses. And I mean,
that triggers the threat response immediately for a lot of people,
right? Yeah. And I've never really been afraid of that. But I always noticed that before a presentation, I would have anxiety. And I remember that I would tell, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus because they're going to hate me for it, but, I would say, don't be afraid, it's okay. And then I never knew how to articulate this, and maybe you can help me articulate it. But I would always say, like, it's weird, but I use my anxiety, I channel it to like a positive, where then I use that as the energy that I need to be able to present.
Yeah.
And that, so I kind of, but I don't know how to articulate that. I just know that I did that. So it was like, okay, I'm anxious, but I'm like, and I'm assuming like maybe athletes do this at those high levels.
Yeah, there's a lot of adrenaline.
That's what it is. Thank you. So is it adrenaline that like where first it feels like it's anxiety, and then I was able to channel it to then be able to like bring it on?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like
the game is on.
It sounds like you've been able to associate that sensation and that feeling with something productive, or something, like you said, positive, right? Like you've been able to see it was something that's not threatening.
Right.
Like you've normalized it. You know that it's part of, right? So I actually love public speaking, but there's not a single public speaking thing that I do that I'm not initially very shaky. Right. That adrenaline is there.
Yeah.
And then somebody else who associates that shakiness with something not tolerable, right? Or something that I need to avoid, is less likely to give to then follow through, or to sign up for anything, but then exposure is really helpful for that, and normalizing is really helpful for that. So it's there's another saying that I say often to my clients, which is, we're going to learn to get comfortable in the uncomfortable. And anxiety and fear are very uncomfortable. But it's to some extent about that. It's about acceptance. It's about not resisting. It's about learning to be with that part and those sensations, and kind of like what we call widening our window of tolerance for it. And so you need that exposure. So, people that are, I always hated the term fearless. Right. And we have such a connotation with like that fear is bad and being fearless is good. And, that comes back to what I was saying before, which is moralizing or pathologizing our emotions. Versus no, like I have fear and I do it anyways. And that to me is the definition of courage. Right. So why would I want to be fearless? Why would I want to be fearless? Why wouldn't I want to be seen or perceive myself as a courageous person? Who could do things that are hard, right? Like my motto to my kids is, you can do hard things, right? Like, it's hard. Like my daughter right now is really afraid of flying, and she's flown her whole life. So exposure has not been, or a lack of exposure has not been the case. The minute she was, I think, 3 months old, I took her to Colombia to visit family, right? So she has always been, but for whatever reason, we had a long flight, and all of a sudden it got triggered her, these sensations and these emotions, because we're on a flight and it was really long, and then turbulence happened, and now she's like, what if I can't get out? So now her, like, I'm stuck here, and this I'm stuck got now imprinted with the plane, right? And so she's been going to therapy, and we talk about it, and I give her all as much as she is willing to let me tell her,
Yeah.
because you're a mom, you know,
Right.
you're not a therapist.
Right.
So even, you know, my kids go to therapy. I say that because I want to normalize that too. I had one client tell me, your kids go to therapy?
Yeah.
Estoy jodida. Like, I'm like, yeah,
I'm in
they
trouble.
do. Yeah, she's like, I'm in trouble
Yeah.
if your kids go to there. I'm like, yeah, why not?
Right.
Like it's, and I absolutely have the tools and this and that, but I'm maybe not the best source for that for them. Like they are going to receive it from somebody else differently. I get to be mom.
Right.
And I want to be mom with the knowledge and the tools I have to give. So, you know, I tell her like, you know, yeah, it's normal. You'll feel that way, but you're okay. And, you know, you could do hard things.
Right.
And I want my kids to, going back to that resiliency. Resiliency is about having courage. And so helping them understand that, you know, having these emotions does not mean you're weak.
Yeah.
Or in the context of faith, which I know is, you know, what you were initially talking about and what's so much, you know, a part of your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you any less faithful to have fear.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
The courage comes in when you say, you know what, I'm going to, and I think, you know, everybody, I think with faith and with fear and religion, it can go two ways. It can be an amazing way for you to tap into that courage or that sense of being supported by, you know, God, and sourcing that in that way. Or you can use it in the way where you're judging yourself and thinking of yourself as somebody of lesser faith because how dare you have fear?
Yeah.
If you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
kind of judging yourself that somehow you having fear makes you less a person of faith.
Right. And
Yeah.
that was what I needed to reconcile, which is
Yeah.
when Father Humphrey was like, but it's perfectly normal.
Yes.
That's part of our human condition.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, and you're explaining it in the psychological terms, right? That it's an emotion. And it's so interesting because when you mentioned the flying, I was exposed to flying and then I worked in news and I think that traumatized me because then after working in news for a couple of years, covering all of these tragic things that happened, I for years was petrified of getting on a plane where the night before I couldn't sleep. It was that bad until finally I had to start doing it for work and then I would have to travel by myself, which like exacerbated this fear that whatever. And until finally I was like you said, it's hard. I was like, I'm going to have to go on this flight. I have no choice. I have to work. I have to go to this place. And then I just found the way of just reconciling. What am I afraid of? Why am I afraid of flying? Like I started really
there, see that tone, even in your shift and the way you're approaching it is curiosity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You're like, okay, I've fought it. I've judged it. Now let me be curious of it for a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was interesting because what I discovered was that it wasn't poof, I'm dead. Do you know what I mean? It was more of like the I don't even want to talk about it because I don't want to freak anybody out, but it was just, you know, the process of, or like the suffering, or, you know, like there were other elements of it. But then once I was able to put a label on it, again, going back to the thyroid thing, I was able to put a label on it, then I was able to overcome it. So man, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah.
I just realized that I'm doing pretty good with this fear thing, which I guess is why
you're being very courageous.
Yes. But, you know, not that I'm like pounding my chest here, because I think we all deal with it. But one of the things that I've seen, and it's happened to me, and I know it's happened to everybody, because like you said, we all have, it's an emotion, right? We all have it. But what happens when fear goes, what is it, DEFCON 1, right? Where it's like it takes over. It becomes, it controls you, right? Like when it's almost to the point of a phobia, or when it's like, how do we deal with that? I'll give you an example. Like my mom, or an unexplained fear, but like my mom, she was petrified of the water, not just like not water, but like the ocean or being next to a pool. She never learned how to swim. And she would always tell me that, because I would ask her, Mommy, did you have a traumatic experience? And she was like, no. And her mother would always say, her mother never understood, my grandmother never understood where that came from.
Yeah.
She was just afraid of it. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Like,
Yeah. Well, it can't, there's a lot of things that live in our subconscious. So even if she consciously doesn't remember anything, that doesn't mean something subconsciously didn't happen.
yeah.
And also that there's just things that we register as fear provoking, right? Like as a threat, like there's a million things that can happen
Right.
in an ocean, right? Like, so there's just certain fears that are very commonplace, but let's say when you're asking, what do we do with that? Like if we want to overcome that, there's a couple modalities that I think people utilize or that are more commonplace for phobias or fears or things like that. So exposure therapy is one of those, right? So they do understanding it, kind of giving you all the things that we talked about today of like understanding what it is and it's your fear response and giving you some way to make sense of it, right?
Yeah.
Also helping you, again, expand your window of tolerance in those situations. If that's something that you want to face, it's going to take a lot of courage. It's not going to be like a switch that turns off. However, there is now some modalities that we didn't have before that are more newer and less kind of like mainstream, which is EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, that is really helpful to kind of bring down the distress and the level of distress like that we feel in order to be able to be more willing or able to like expose ourselves to these things.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
like to things that you're chronically, let's say, afraid of.
There still has to be a willingness to kind of approach these things that are like, fear provoking. But ultimately there's going to be sensations and there's going to be like, let's say I've done EMDR, I have done rationalizing, I've done everything with electric escalators. Like for me, I don't like them. But do I avoid them? No. I still go on them. I just need a minute, but there's still sensations in my body that are uncomfortable, but I can tolerate them.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this concept of accepting that they're there and kind of widening that window of tolerance. We have EMDR that helps you kind of, if it is trauma based, or even the symptoms we can bring down with EMDR as well. There's exposure therapy. So there's a lot of things that if it's something that you're perpetually lived with, like something like your mom did, that would be something that would be helpful to go to a therapist for if you're really ready to face that.
Yeah, to kind of, again, reconcile and understand where it's coming from, because sometimes it's just not something that you just don't understand. Why am I afraid of spiders? I don't know. That's not, I don't know why I use that example.
It's a pretty, right?
I'm not, but I mean, I don't like them, but anyway. But it's interesting. I was listening to a commentary, I don't remember where, about this love-hate relationship with fear. And I wanted to talk to you about it because you're so right in that society says we shouldn't have fear, right? And we don't want to have fear, but yet we want to be entertained by fear. So this whole concept of love, hate, of fear. So like we'll go to the horror, things, or we
roller coasters.
Or roller coasters, or, we pay to go see a horror movie, like what's all that about? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, we don't want to be afraid, but yet we pay to be entertained by being afraid.
Well, going back to that, there is we don't like fear that we have no control or uncertainty around. But if I go to a movie, I have some control in that. I know there's a beginning, middle, and an end. I can close my eyes, right? Like I can do certain things. So maybe they like the adrenaline. I personally don't. Like I'm one of those people. I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
I'll
pass.
But I also think if I am, for example, personally, if I am going to confront something that's fear provoking, it's more so because I want the satisfaction of knowing that I did. And so it's more about like being able to kind of like build that resiliency in myself. So I might purposefully, intentionally put myself in those situations. But I think for everyone, it might be different. Like, but there is a difference when it's a fear you can control and that the outcome. We really don't like the ones that we don't know or can control the outcome.
Right.
And so it becomes, again, about being able to be more resilient and tolerant of uncertainty because it's inevitable. Yeah. It's inevitable in life. It's part of life. Being able to kind of hold two truths, which is I may not be okay right now, or maybe certain things in life will come along that will kind of like rock the boat and really make it difficult for a while, and I will be okay.
Yeah.
And for some people, there isn't, at least in an awareness way, which is where EMDR and IFS are really good for that too. They kind of get stuck in moments in time where that traumatic event or that fear-provoking event, they can go back there and stay stuck. Like literally their nervous system, all of it gets stuck there.
Okay.
And so they might be, this is like PTSD, right? So you're in here with Joni, and maybe I hear a noise, and that will trigger a flashback to when I was at war or something else, or I have an image that takes me back, and I will feel all those things in my body. And it's because the part of my brain that stores that hasn't processed that memory to the point where now I can still be oriented to today and kind of put it in its proper place.
Yeah.
And our mind needs help doing that. And EMDR is great for that. Yeah. IFS can be great for things like that. Because what I do want people to know is, if you're feeling it, it's for a reason. Something's there, and you're better off trying to understand it. And you're better off trying to give yourself grace and a lot of compassion for it. Normalize that, understand that that's part of the human experience, is to feel these things, and that you're not doing anything wrong because you're feeling that. Yeah. And if it's something that you can find peace and ease through that on your own, great. But if you need help, there's people that can help.
Yeah. I think that's so important too, because to give yourself that grace to say it's okay, especially when you've been through a traumatic event that, like you said, you have to go through it, and it's better to go through it and understand it than repress it, because then it's always just going to continually come back in some way, shape, or form. And so and then that's not healthy.
Yeah.
And then that's where it,
yeah, and then it starts
leads to other
manifesting and
things.
generalizing in our life in ways that we don't even realize. It's that's related to my past, right? Or to this experience. And it's not, and it may not even be that one single event, but like that single event and all the other ones that have kind of also been imprinted with that one, that it kind of just piles up. And then now we hit this wall at a certain point, because, we can take so much, we can suppress so much, we can contain so much before we actually have to sit with it. Yeah. And we need somebody to help us facilitate that, Yeah. And I think it again, I shout out to the priest that said that to you.
Yes.
And I love that spiritual religious leaders are getting more emotionally knowledgeable on things, and are like not just looking at this through a lens of one lens, right? Which is, maybe the Bible or whatever it may be, that they're actually getting educated in other ways, because then they're bringing that back to their communities. And because something that we can and had been done for a long time was that we would just like spiritually bypass what we would feel. Yeah. Like we would just explain everything away with like, oh, that's that you don't have enough faith, or
right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And that is making people sicker than well. Yeah. So there is this concept called, and this feels very unrelated, but we're here, religious trauma. Right. Which is all of the things that maybe with learning that at such a young age, and all of those messages that we received that we didn't necessarily make sense, because they didn't actually give us proper guidance in certain ways, ended up kind of like having the opposite effect. Yeah. Right? So I can see that, yeah. So you can do both. You can go to church 100%. And go to therapy and, all those things. And I think 100%. Sometimes people think they're mutually exclusive things.
And they're not. Yeah. And you're right too, because we're all on a different faith journey, and everybody is in a different place. So you can't also just give a blanket statement like, oh, you don't have enough faith and that's why you're fearful. And that's why I brought it up in the intro, because it's, it really depends on where you are in your faith journey that you are actually able to just surrender. Some people are just able to surrender everything and they live their life that way. And wow, I mean, I aspire to that, but sometimes I'm a control freak. So I'm still like, God, it's all on you, but I want to hold on to this part. You know what I mean? Like, but we're all on a different journey. So when you say to someone, oh, you're feeling fear because you don't have enough faith, that could be detrimental because that person may not be at a place in their faith journey to be able to respond to that,
or even know what to do with that,
or to know what to do with that, and or emotionally they're not in the right place to be able to reconcile what's going on. And so I think it's important to have that balance. And I firmly believe in therapy and also, spiritual counseling. I think it's great to have both because we're very complex beings. And so we need to nourish all of our parts, as you say.
Exactly.
But one of the things that you mentioned earlier about just that, especially when we were talking about the movies, right? Where it's like, I'm going into a movie because I can control it, right? And I know what the outcome, and I'm just going to go in for the rush. I don't like it, but that's okay. But I want to bring this up because I think that it's happening a lot nowadays in that many people are getting laid off from their jobs. So that brings a huge truckload of uncertainty, especially if you are, you need your job. 99% of people work because they need their jobs, right? You need to provide, you need to be able to survive, right? And now with the job market the way that it is, it's harder to find work. And then people, I'm a Gen Xer. Gen Xers are now competing with kids out of college for the same positions, right? Where before that wasn't really the case, right? And so it's really difficult. And a lot of people are now going through this phase of reinvention. And it's funny because we talked about this earlier because you reinvented yourself.
Yeah.
So you're a therapist now, but that wasn't what you always did before. And I've had to reinvent. Well, I haven't had to, I chose it, but I say I had to because I'm like, okay, I made this choice. Now I have to like go along with it, right? Like, okay, here we go.
No turning back now.
No turning back. But a lot of people are going through this reinvention process and it's hard. It's scary.
Yeah.
And in the case of this podcast is a perfect example. I've had this in my head for 7 years. It took me 7 years to actually say, here I am and I'm doing this. And a lot of it was fear. I was afraid.
Yeah.
But what was I afraid of? I didn't reconcile that. So then I would kind of ignore it. I didn't need to do it. So then I didn't do it until I finally realized, well, I had a reputation to protect because I worked in production. So, again, my expectation, my bar was up here. Everything had to be perfect. And if it wasn't perfect, then I wasn't going to do it. I can't start. And so all of these things led to this delay, right? And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that in general, because I know that that's a recurring theme for a lot of people about the fear of change, but change as it relates to a new path, a new career path. Like what can we tell people that are going through this that might be a little bit afraid of just, hey, it's okay. Like you can go in this direction.
Yeah. And I love that you gave those two examples because the one of like, I chose the change, right? And change like being laid off that you don't choose, that you have less control over.
Yeah.
So already that contextually is going to be felt differently.
Yeah.
Even though both will have its own level of fear. But, when you're laid off, there's also the element of rejection. Right. So there's fear of the uncertain. How am I going to provide? But then there's also like, am I even good enough now? So there's so much you have to reconcile. Right.
Yeah.
Versus and when there's constant changes that are happening, which goes back to normalizing that the only thing constant in life is change, even if you've had stability for many years, right? Like in certain companies, you can stay for 20 years and then there's a certain comfort in that, right?
Yeah.
And then, so when you are having to see yourself change, that can put a lot of things into question. And that's almost like that growing pain phase
Yeah.
that you have to kind of get to a place eventually. And again, there's no expectation of that being from one day to another.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually more concerned with somebody who kind of like has a really big life experience and then kind of like goes, well, that's that. What's next? Like, ooh, I question that a little bit more. I'm like, are you actually okay?
Yeah.
Or are you really just suppressing things here? Right. So you're better off feeling what's the reality, the weight of what's happening. Like, oh yeah, I'm noticing there's a part of me that feels not good enough and rejected in all of this. And I notice there's a part of me that's feeling unsure about the future. Right. And this acknowledging that and giving those parts of us to have space to feel what they're feeling, and eventually, helping these people mobilize into where they can go from here. Because the crux of it is you don't feel stable enough, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of uncertainty. So how do we first anchor ourselves to some things in our life that are stable, right? Because look around what's stable in your life right now. Do you have savings? Do you have people in your life that can, hold you for now in this moment in time? Because we need those like anchors in moments where there's a lot of uncertainty, and move towards more stability. Because then eventually, whatever that looks like, right? Once you get to that stability and then you kind of feeling a little bit better, if not always, many times you look back and you're like, oh, I know why that happened, or I understand why that happened, or do you know what I mean? Like this, I am better off where I am now, or I'm grateful for that process because I was able to be here where I am now.
Yeah.
So those two truths can be true, which was that it sucked that you went through it.
Right.
And that you're in a better place.
Yeah.
And that process doesn't mean you did it wrong. It doesn't mean that you were failing at something. It means that's life.
Yeah.
And I think we are so conditioned to believe that things go wrong, somebody's to blame, or that there's some sort of like it's a derailment due to your lack of preparedness, or your character, or you weren't good enough, or like that's what slows down that process.
Right.
Because there's so much judgment and there's so much fear that's valid, but at some point we have to put it in its proper place.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can't live in that
those are
perpetual
stories.
place.
Yeah, they're stories, they're beliefs that are valid because we first feel the weight of things through the most vulnerable parts of us. We are vulnerable.
Yeah.
There's fragility in us. That's a beautiful thing. There can be strength in that fragility, and meaning, how do I meet myself where I'm at? And going back to IFS and parts work, why I love that is essentially what parts work says, or IFS, that model says, is there's an observing self inside of us. Self with a capital S. Okay. And not self as selfish or self-absorbed, but just self.
Right.
And this observing self, if we can be mostly grounded in that observing self, then we have a lot more space and openness and flexibility to work with and deal with the different parts of us that are uncertain, that feel rejected, that we're complex.
Yes.
But none of these parts, if they're ever the ones in the driver's seat, that's where we can get derailed. Yeah. But essentially the goal of IFS is that there's more of that, I use these words interchangeably, but self, the wiser self, some people might call it the higher self. And in some social environments, they call self is like the God within. Yeah. So that part that's observing and is conscientious of what's happening inside of me is the part that can source peace to those other parts. So we're going to have to anchor ourselves, yes, in our community and the people around us, but there's got to eventually also be a source within that helps us anchor the parts inside of us, that kind of guides and says, okay, I am resourced inside of me. There is courage inside of me. So the way we describe self, how do we know if we're in self is described as calm and courageous and compassionate, right? All these words, right? That now you know why they're calling it the God within, right? Compassionate and and courageous and creative. And so from that place, you have a lot more movability.
Yes.
Because you need creativity and courage to make the next step in your life.
Right.
The anxious part's very limited in their resources. The anxious part just knows how to be anxious.
Yeah.
It knows how to avoid. It knows how to get you small, right? But that's the default one.
Right.
The other, once we can tap into, once we acknowledge, okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
And now we need to tap into more of this higher self, as we would call ourself. That's where we get more movability. That's when that's what allowed you to be in that doctor's room and be like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
If I had to bet, you were more in self than you were in that anxious part.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Because I think also when you're in that perpetual anxious part, it's also dangerous, correct me if I'm wrong, because it can lead you to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
Right. Like, because you're now, what is it? Fight or flight mode,
or no decisions.
Or paralyzed by fear. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're either not doing anything or you're just making bad decisions because you feel you need to get an answer right away because you need this, you need that, right? I mean,
you haven't yet grounded yourself enough and be like, wait, let's pause. I notice these parts of me, but these parts of me are not the part of me that can kind of like observe this and has the perspective to look at not just this moment in time, but the overall arching view. And we need that in order. And that in itself brings a lot of calmness to our parts. So automatically, like when I do an IFS session, we start off and there's a lot of activation in a person and they're like, and I'm starting to, because I can hear, like, I'm like, there's an anxious part. And then there's another part here that's very critical of this part. So, by the way, they criticize each other and they fight, literally like the movie.
Yeah.
Literally like the movie Inside Out. So they're like, I can hear all of that chaos. And of course, this person is not at peace. Yeah. And so by the time we end, like, the IFS session or the parts work that we're doing, I say, check in inside with yourself again. What do you notice? And they're like, there's spaciousness, there's calm, I'm at ease, I know where I'm going now with this, right? But it's because we were so in our head and these parts were so activated that you couldn't access that part of you that was calm, that had the perspective.
Right. To be able to see things more clearly and be able to make better decisions. Yeah. Because a lot of times too, in those situations specifically related to, work, reinvention and careers, our identities are so attached to what we do that then you have to like separate that. Yeah. That separation is very hard. Yeah.
Well, oftentimes.
And there's fear in that.
Totally. Who am I if I'm not this part?
Exactly.
Who am I if I'm not this part?
Yeah.
If I'm not this perfectionist part, I don't know how to do it any other way. Yeah. So it's about learning another way of doing it. So it's not about being less ambitious or not having goals. It's, can you do that from another part of yourself, or not a part, but from the source that's more calm and has perspective and has courage? And can you do it from there? Right? And then these other parts start trusting, not that the whole world is going to be curated in this perfect way, that nothing's going to bad happen to me. Yeah. Because that's out of our control.
Things are going to happen.
But the parts of us start trusting that within, it's figure outable. I'm capable. I can resource these things within myself, even in moments of uncertainty and turmoil.
Yeah. And crisis, right? Yeah. Because we're going to face crisis at some point, whatever it may look like. Yeah. So all this conversation has been fascinating, and I feel we could do
30
you know what? You're
more.
Coming back. I think you need to come like once a month, and we'll pick a topic and talk. This is amazing. But what would you like our viewers or listeners to take away when it comes to fear? Like, what's that one thing that I mean, I've learned a lot, but what would you like people to understand about it?
Yeah. It's a scared part. It needs our help. It needs more than our judgment. Just let's see if you can tap into what it is that it needs, what is it afraid of, so that we can help it as best that we can. But you have to start from a place of acceptance of it, of curiosity with it, not judgment, not resistance, not avoidance. To understand that all it's trying to do is keep you safe. That's all it's trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's an emotion, and we just have to work through it, though.
Yeah. Learn to, you can't help a part of yourself, or you can't regulate yourself if you don't first allow yourself or understand, like, this is part of being a human being. Like this, we've been created with this nervous system that feels something called fear. Right. And its purpose is to protect us. And so, so we're not walking off cliffs, as we'd say, or like, doing things that we shouldn't do. Right.
Right.
And yet we still do. But that there's a reason why we fear all these things. And a lot of it is that we've been taught and conditioned to be. And some of them are actual fearful things. Like, it's scary to get a diagnosis and have to go under a knife. And, also we don't feel anxious or fearful about things we don't care about. It's closely tied to things that we care about. We care about losing people in our life. We care about our jobs. We care about what other people think about us. We care, we should care less, but we do.
About that specifically, but yes.
But we
care about our children, for example.
We care about our children.
So that's a big fear too. Like, oh my gosh, my child, that, or my adult child,
So, how do we hold two truths? I have 2 college age kids that don't live with me anymore, right? And so how do I hold both the wanting to protect them and accepting that I can't?
Right.
I can't always. And I can't. Right. And so, but I have to, right? There's like moms that are like, I have to. And like you track them and you put the Life 360, and all that is anxiety.
Yeah.
All that is fear. And you're not keeping them any safer, and you're probably pushing them away.
Well, because it feels like you want to control the situation, and there's no control there.
And by the way, it doesn't fare well in relationships to want to control somebody. And it's coming from a place of protection.
Yes.
But it also is impossible. And then it creates a lot of resistance in you, but it also, for the people around you, they also are resisting wanting to be around that, because essentially we all want to be free, right? Like you want to be free of these feelings, and people also want to feel that they have movement, that there isn't this, fear can be very rigid because we have to kind of contract to protect ourselves. But at some point we have to like experiment with not contracting ourselves so much, right? With being okay with, I don't know for sure, and it's safe enough. I always kind of tell my clients, like, you can't guarantee safety, but can you move within the safe enough? Which goes back to perfectionism.
Right.
If you can't guarantee perfection, can you move within the good enough?
Right.
You started this podcast and you don't have everything. I mean, in my eyes, it looks perfect. But,
thank you.
You might see it. That perfectionistic part of you might be like, something's missing.
Right.
But it's good enough to start. And for somebody else, that ironically, that's their perfect, which is what I tell people that are very perfectionistic. I'm like, that you're good enough as somebody else is perfect. So you're good to go.
You're good to go.
You're good to go.
Because everybody has different standards, right?
But we fear so many things because we've been conditioned to fear a lot of things.
Yeah.
So it's about learning, what is that source? What's the recurring theme of my fear? And learning to be okay with that uncertainty.
Yeah.
And protecting ourselves where we can, controlling what we can, and accepting what we can't.
Yeah, 100%. And I think basically, I love what you said, that, you don't like the term fearless, right? Because then that negates something that's natural in us.
Yep.
So it's really about not being afraid of fear.
Yes. 1,000%.
Right?
Yep.
I like that.
That was the last thing que me quedaba por decir that I hadn't said. We become afraid of fear.
Right.
But not being afraid of fear is really that's the trick.
Yeah.
That's the way out of this.
That's the way out of this. Not to be afraid of it, but to be curious about it and sit with it and figure out what's going on.
Yep.
So there you go. And also, because this is a big theme of mine in this podcast, which is that you're not alone. So, hey, everybody, we all have it.
Yeah. Definitely.
We all have it. It's just a matter of learning how to live with it and not be afraid of it. So there you go. So where can people find you?
My Instagram is Cat Gets Curious. And my Instagram, or my website, should I say, is www.safeplacetherapy.net.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. This was a great conversation, which I know is going to help a lot of people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Felt very comfortable. No fear at all.
No fear at all.
Well, here in my life, yes. Right now.
I
felt very comfortable.
We're chill. We're chill right now. Well, thank you once again. And all of you out there, remember, you are not alone. Let's go out and seek wisdom together. Thank you for joining us in today's episode of the Seeking Wisdom podcast. My prayer is that something you heard today sparked courage and insight for your road ahead. If something in this conversation moved you, share it with a friend. Like, subscribe, leave a quick review or a comment so that more people can hear about these stories of faith and resilience. Lastly, I'd like to invite you to join this circle of the community of wisdom seekers. Connect with us on social media at the handle @JoniMarmo or visit jonimarmo.com so we can keep this conversation going. And remember, you are never alone, and wisdom is waiting in your story.